and welcome, perspective listeners and viewers. We are here. This is Perspectives with
With Seth.
and Martina. And I'm going to give a warning today. So, my camera is going to be moving as I move. It's some motion shit that's on my camera that I cannot figure out how to turn off, and I don't have the patience to figure that out
She's
right now.
tried.
I've tried. So, as you can see, it's moving with me now. So, okay, so a lot of that's going to be happening. So people be like, what's going on? Is it a ghost? It's the ghost of the motion camera, just so we know.
If you know how to turn this off, you can put a comment on here.
Man, on here. Hopefully by the time this posts, I'll figure this out. But I don't know. So we just putting that out. It's moving with me. But anyway, welcome back, people, to our final installment of talking about women in politics and pretty much why the world and well, this country right now hates women, but then
Yeah.
also political women, like women who are politicians as well. And so, yeah, the last two videos we have, yeah, really kind of think focused in on like, I think like the different ways that women are often discriminated against. I think just in general. And then,
Yeah.
how does that I mean, you're already facing discrimination, but um, what does that look like being a woman in politics? And so we are going to wrap this series up. And so everybody just, tune in. And if you haven't watched the first two videos, you should go back and do that. Like it, follow us if you're not. We really appreciate it. It helps us out. And yeah, I think I don't really have much to say. I will as we start talking. But I guess we are concluding. What are we wrapping up with it? What are
Yeah.
some things you're thinking right now?
Yeah. I think, as you mentioned, the whole premise of this was sort of like women, particularly women in politics, women being seen as either not seen or seen as leaders. And I think one of the biggest things that I recall from just like our last two conversations is really that a lot of it falls from like biases against women and just the
Mhm.
perception. Like it's just like the perception of like who women are, what they're capable of, what they're not capable of, and things like that. And I think that is something that, can be changed, right? Like perceptions can be
Yes.
changed, right? Like that has nothing like it's not something that is, unmovable, unchangeable. Like no, perception is just perception. It's we can change that. And I think that is something that I think we can dig into today of like what does it take to like change the perception that society has, not just for women in politics but just women in general.
Yeah.
I think it's just this whole view because what women in politics go against and the barriers and the obstacles that they have are pretty much the same ones that women go through in everyday life.
Every day.
Like it's the same biases, it's the same perceptions, it's the same sort of like cultural ideas that we have as a society of what women are capable of. um and it's not so much that what's holding us back is like our own abilities or like things like that.
Mm-mm.
um I'll just go back, like it's perception, like it's
Yeah.
this idea that people have of what women are capable of or what industries we should be in, um and things like that. So I think that's really sort of what I feel like our
Hmm.
not our final conversation is, at least
It's never the final conversation.
as we close out this series,
Yes, never the final.
and sort of like the final episode of this series that will probably tie into something else in the future. But I think that's really what was on my mind when we were talking about like how we're going to close this out and things, because I'm like, man, like it really isn't like, I'll dig in, I'll go into a little bit. I had a conversation
Hmm.
not too long ago. And I was ranting about like women in politics and how we're seen and all these things. I was just kind of talking about the our most recent, episodes and just like
Yeah.
things like that. And the person I was talking to was like, well, maybe, just, women just shouldn't be part of politics. Maybe that's just an industry they're not part of it. And I was like, that is not the point that I'm trying to make.
Is this a woman or a man saying
This is
this?
a man. And I was like, no, like that's not the thing. Like the point is that because there's this perception, and I think that's where I kind of started digging into the perception piece, was like there's this perception that women are only capable of certain things and we only belong because those doors have been closed to us for so long, because we've been told you belong in the household, you belong, your
Mhm.
maids and your like housewives, and you can, do dishes and, you know wash clothes, and,
Be it like
and
a teacher,
you can be a teacher, you can be a
nursing.
nurse, you can be, medical assistant, like, and all these
Mhm.
things. Like, there's these roles that we're put towards. But, I was like, imagine if we were told from a very young age that you really can be anything. You could be a construction worker, you can be an engineer, you can be an astronaut, you can be a doctor, neurologist, like all these different doctor fields that for a very long time there's not a lot. You could be president, you like all
Yeah.
these things, but like we're not, because for so long we've been told no, you again, a lot of times like teachers, nurses, like,
But that's why I was like,
you
and
know,
it's no offense to teachers and nurses. We need them.
no, like,
Yes.
and even when you think of like administrative assistants, when like personal
Mhm.
assistants, like all these roles that people were like, this is what women, and I think for so long. And I was like, I don't blame like men to be like, well, maybe it's just not their industry, because that's just what they've always been told, or sort of like what they've seen. And I'm like, no, but like we need to change that perception. Like that's why I like go back to like that's what we need to change. And I think we need to start talking about like how do we change these perceptions? Like what can we do? Like I don't know. Like I have some ideas maybe what we could do, but I don't know what we could do in the grand scheme of things.
And that's the thing is, it is the grand scheme of things because I'm sure it's you in your household, in my household. I was, like we said, why don't we tell the little girls that they can be whatever they want? I grew up like that. I did. My parents had high hopes for me. And I think I have delivered pretty good.
Yeah.
I didn't go to medical school, but I was close. It's close.
It's okay.
Um,
I didn't go to law school, so
there we go. You know. But like my parents, and this is, Mississippi, education is horrible in general. It's a horrible state. I love you, Mississippi. And but um growing up, my parents always told me I could do what I wanted to do. I mean, still to this day, both of my
yeah.
parents are like, you have so much you still have to do, you know,
Yeah.
before you leave this earth. There's so much you have to do. And I think it is kind of goes back to like you're talking about this man who made this comment. Well, and so did he say when you mentioned about, oh, well, maybe women should do something else? Did he say I guess, did he explain why he said that? I mean, even though you were saying like, da, 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 this is what happened to women and why we're
Mhm.
treated a certain way, but did he have anything to say, I guess, more positive about, I guess, like, this is what, we can
Yeah.
do.
I will say that they were like, he was like, okay, I now that you've kind of run through this list
Hmm.
of things, like I see where I maybe didn't really kind of see that side of the story, or like how that is. And I think that's what a lot of people end up understanding, is like, oh, I never was told that, or I never really saw that side of the conversation, right? Like I never thought about like the barriers that have been put, against women, or how I've been conditioned to think of women this certain way, or these industries to only be male dominated, or they're like, they're supposed to be for men. And I think that's, you know, part of it. And to me, it goes back to just the amount of work that there still needs to be done to change that thinking, to sort of, and sometimes it's just exposing people to different
Yes.
conversations and different, perspectives. um but I really think once we had that conversation, like they were more open to like, okay, like I can see that, like okay, now I understand, or I can, give credit, or I can like take back what I've said. And I think they were like, okay, like, now that you've talked to me and sort of explained it to me, like, and it goes back to like people taking the time to like explain things versus just sort of like going in and just going off on a person and being like, okay, let me take a step back. Maybe they've never had this kind of conversation before. They've never really been exposed to like whatever. And if I always have to remind myself, like, some people are in bubbles. Some people don't live and breathe social justice issues throughout their days or are completely, fully aware of what's happening in the world. And I think that's where I came from. But like I was glad that they at least were like able to have a conversation versus just sticking to their like, no, like that doesn't make any sense, or you're wrong, or that's not the way it is. Like, no, that women should be here and men should be here, and that's it. Um,
it made me, you talked about the sometimes people just needs to be exposed to things. So I have this running list of quotes that I keep when I hear a quote. And I think one of my very first quotes I put on the list is like, privilege is not always in wealth and material things, it's in exposure. Um,
mm,
and that's so true. And I think particularly around this issue and like so many other issues as well.
yeah,
And I guess, kind of, obviously we do need to have conversations with individuals like this man you're talking about without us all getting like flustered. And, for me, that's often kind of hard because again, as I've said on here, I don't have to identify with somebody to
right.
understand and
Hmm.
and be empathetic with them. And
Yeah.
again, maybe that goes back to I'm a woman and I'm black, so I know the struggles that other
Mm,
minority groups or other
yeah.
religious group people go through. I don't have to go through, I don't have to be Muslim to understand how they're always just hated on. And a lot of
Yeah.
times, I'm not singling them out, but I don't have to like be any sort of these different things to be like, yeah, that's fucked up. Like,
Yeah.
or, or to just like, oh, like the light bulb went off. Yeah, that's real messed up, you know? And so I think that's often something I'm kind of always kind of going back and forth with too. Is just like, in order, I think, to get people to change their perspectives, which is what we're saying, their perspectives about things, is them being open to it. And I guess so I guess, how do you get people to be open? And because a lot of, we often talk about a
Yeah.
lot of different things like before we hop on and actually record. And it's like, how do you get, because basically, what we need men to realize this. And it's
Oh, yeah.
sad. It's sad, but we do because I don't it's not necessarily the women. I mean, obviously, you have the pick me's and they just do whatever they're told. But I mean, it's really the men that we need on our side because men have created this. They created this, well, women shouldn't do this, that, and another by keeping us barefoot and pregnant
Yeah.
or keeping us limited to only these are the five careers you have, and this is all you can do. And
Hmm.
so it's men who have created those sort of boundaries and limitations for women. And we need other men to realize that nobody should have limits or boundaries as to what they do. Like, if you want to be a politician, honey, or if you want to keep being a teacher, that's wonderful, but let that be your choice and not necessarily something that, well, somebody, told me that's all I could do. So that's all I want to do. And, that's to me just so it is so unfortunate. But again, I think, in this country, as we've kind of been talking about in the last few episodes as well, is that, we have women's voices in politics, particularly coming out. We talked about Jasmine and AOC.
Yeah.
And AOC has always kind of been vocal since she's been in there. But I think, again, that's great. And we need to come together, continue to do that. But a big part of me is like, we need men to do. It's not really us. I think in certain
Hmm.
points it's us because it's like this thing, um, this is kind of another quote, but it's like you have been oppressed so long, like you have been oppressed so long that you oppress yourself. And I think women do that too. I mean, a lot of people, like minorities, we do that. We do that.
Yeah.
We have people that are like, oh, well, why do people destroy their own neighborhoods? There's a lot more to it than just that. I mean, and that's just an example that I'm using. But it's like, because of how society views women, I think some women have accepted that, and some women have not. As
Yeah.
obviously as we see this group of like women who are loud and proud, and they should
Hmm.
be. Um, but then I feel like we still, because women are not the minority. I mean, not the majority. We are the minority. We're not the majority in this country. We need help. like, I think we need to have conversations like
Mhm.
this and be patient with other people who, if he's a white man, he's inside, he's like you said, people in their little bubbles. To me, that's still so fascinating. Like,
Yeah,
oh my God, please get out your little bubble.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's just me babbling.
No, I think you brought up a lot of great points, and I think to go back to sort of like what you were talking about, like how do we like move forward? Like, yeah, there is this need about men being allies, right? And coming forth and sort of speaking out and calling out biases in their workplaces, in their own homes. Like I think like
Yes.
like as you're if you're a dad and you're raising, you know, sons and daughters, like, how are you treating them? Like, are you treating them differently? Are you like, having
Mhm.
different expectations for them? Like, how is, and I think that's also part of it. Like, there's so many layers to to this, and just so many
Yeah.
things that go into it. And I think also as like women, how are we talking to like the younger generations? How are we uplifting our young women? How are we making sure that young men understand like their role and like how they it's just so many different things. But I think to your point, like we definitely need more allies out here, you know in all sectors, whether it's
Yes.
with even with your friends, like you know just being able to call out your friends for saying some like ridiculous
That's
or
that stuff.
sexist things, and I think there isn't like I know years back when I had guy friends, I'd be like, hey, like you just can't say things like that. Like that's not cool. But
Mm.
like are they really gonna listen to me because they're like, oh, you're just one of them, like you're a woman, like of course, but if another guy calls them out, like it hits differently, right? Like
Yes.
it's the same way we need white allies to like speak, like it's the same kind of way. And I think that's where we as women, I think sometimes fall short because we don't have a lot of allies. Like we don't know what's happening behind closed doors where we're not in. It's
Hmm.
the same way when we think of like, rooms where, people of color are not in. Like if nobody's speaking up for us or calling, things that are wrong out there, then it's the same thing, right? If nobody's really kind of, you know, not sort of defending us, but like saying like, no, so and so, like she can do it. Like
Hmm.
there's they can do it. Like they can step up, they can lead, they can do, and I think it's the same thing of having those allies. And sometimes we hope that we have them, and but most of the time I think we live in a society that unfortunately is like me, myself, and I, first.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not about like, okay, like how can I uplift the others? Like how can I uplift and even among women, because
Yeah.
there's so few spots, as you kind of get higher in careers and in different spaces, whether it's politics, whether it's corporate,
Mhm.
whether it's, other industries. Like there's just as you get higher and higher, there's just so many that we start gatekeeping. And we've talked about this in other
Yes.
episodes too, like, and it's the same thing. Like I see, depending what industry you're in, you might see women gatekeeping some of those like higher opportunities because they're like, no, like if I don't protect it or like I'm not gonna let this go because
Hmm.
there's just so few of them, which I think sometimes works against us, whether
I
you're
know I hate when it does that because men can do that and it's
yeah, I
okay.
mean, men do it. Like
They do it. So I'm saying they do it.
they do it, and it's sort of like, and I think that's when we fall victims to what society has been doing, and how they've kind of kept women and people of color out of these spaces because they've kept so many of these industries, positions of power. Like there's all these things. So like when we start operating in the same ways, then we just feed into the same norms and we just sort of like continue to uphold those institutions, those ways of doing things, and those systems in place. So there's a lot to it. And I've rambled on. That's your turn,
No,
Martina.
I was rambling, but I was just thinking like, again, this is a tough conversation. I would one day we'll do this. Love to have this sort of panel of men
Mm,
folk because I want to, would love to know. Well, because I was saying, step back a minute. It's not that many men that I know, and I'm not acting like I know a whole lot of them. That there are a few men I think that actually understand and get it.
mm.
But in that group, like we said, you're doing yours. Good for you. Check mark. But this other group over here is who I want on the panel. I just want to know, like, how were you raised? Because a lot
Mm,
of things do come from, because we often believe something based on how we grew up or what we know.
yeah.
And so I was just interested in like how you were raised. Were you, if did you have a two-parent household? Which again, I'm not again, and this goes back to nobody who may not was in this. I'm just interested in thinking some things that I would love to know
Hmm.
about, I think particularly about men who have this very narrow view of women. Where does basically I'm getting at, where does that come from? I would love to know
Hmm.
where does that come from? And I mean, we can all speculate and say, oh, it came from this and not that. But I'm really
Yeah.
interested, like, where does your limited view of women stem from? Where is like it's, and for them, do they even see it as limited?
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of them may not say it's like, kind of going back to your friend, I ain't thought about it that deep. But then you
Hmm.
have some men who are really adamant that women
Yeah.
need to stay in their place.
Oh,
And
yeah.
those men, or it's harder probably having those conversations because they're very much, you women, you need to do what you're told, and that's just it. And they
Yeah.
blame it on the Bible, or they just say, well, I'm the man and you're gonna do what I say, or that's it. And there are a lot of women that are stuck in that sort of world, I won't call out any names, but we follow some of them on our TikToks. And these women who seem like they're living sometimes glamorous life, sometimes not. There's one particular
Hmm.
woman who I know, I'm not again gonna call them out, but they live on a little farm and they have a shit ton of kids. And this woman does everything herself. Or is that what it seems like she does? She might have help, and she's married into a very wealthy family, you know? And part of me is like, is this really the life she set out for herself? Is this really
Hmm.
how she saw herself?
Yeah.
And again, not saying for people women who want to do that, absolutely, that's power to it. But I would love to have a sit down conversation with men about this. And if there are any men listening to this, because I know often this series and like I think there's another series that often gets a lot of comments. And I know we're bashing. It seems like we're bashing a lot. But you men bash us every day, you're always at us.
Yes.
But I would like to know in the comments though, really like what is this kind of narrow view that men have? And again, do you even think it's a narrow view? And
Yeah.
honestly, people comment what you like, and I'll block it if I don't like it. But I am very like interested into why is it like kind of like your way or the highway. And again, I know we taking this back into politics, but I am just very interested, and I would like to hear from men in the comments, to know, like, if you are that man, or if you have friends or people in your
Yeah.
family that think like that, can you place why they have those thoughts? And you know, even if it's, I mean, I think it's stupid, but again, this is not about me. I want to know because these are things that, like, in order for all of us to come together, we're gonna all have to try to listen to each other, and that's a part of it. Unfortunately, sometimes
I think that's such a great point of like really trying to get to like essentially the root cause, right? Like why,
cause analysis. Here we
yeah,
go.
like why are women not seen as leaders, whether you're thinking of political realms, whether you're thinking just everyday life, whether you're thinking of C-suite level kind of thing. And I think that there is a lot to that. And I think there's a lot of men that we could talk to. I think there's your everyday
Mhm.
individual, your everyday man, and just kind of like, has lived their life. I think there's the, men who have grown up and like are that C-suite level and probably
Mhm.
we're always gonna be at that we're always gonna be in that level. I've shared this before. I think religion plays such a huge role
Yep.
in how society views women, and things like that. So I know I've talked about it before. That series is coming, uh,
Yes. Yes.
for sure. But I think that is an extension of this, right? Like, what role has you know, whether it's religion or other industries have played around it. So I love the idea of like having men from different walks of life share how they view women, like what is the role of women from
Mhm.
their point of view, uh what, and like how did that thought process or that
How did it come about? How
yeah,
did you get here?
like because I think about you know who raises men, right? Like it's women for the most part. Like
Mhm.
it's your mom, and most moms are going to be pretty like strong. They're going to be, taking care of their families. They're the ones that are showing up and things like that. And now, you know, there's an exception to every rule. So like I'm not saying all women and all moms are this way and all,
Yeah, absolutely.
but at least the women that I've seen and like from my experience, I was like, they've been strong women. Like I think every mom that I know in my life have been strong women and I've shared this before, like superpowers when you're a mom. Cause I'm like, absolutely not. Like as someone who does not have kids, I was like, I don't know how y'all do it. Like,
I don't either. I
uh,
don't.
and and to see men then grow up who had maybe strong women,
Hmm.
figures, right? And had role models of strong women and see them turn around and be like, nah, like you belong at home, you're weak, you're all these things. And I'm like, where where does that disconnect happen to your point of like, because again, like I've seen that happen where like, these men treat whether it's their mom, the women in their lives, like trash. And I'm like, there is no way because I know who your mom is. Like I know who like
Right.
and there's no way like and you're out here acting a fool.
Savage.
When there's so it's definitely like, to the point of like where in society does that, veer completely off the chain? Like where do these thoughts, where do these, perceptions and concepts and ideas of who women are and what their role are in society and in men's life, like things like that. Because a lot of the times they're like, why are you trying to be better than me, or you're trying to dominate me, or like you're never, and I'm like, that's not the way it is. I was like,
Not the way it is.
like men and women can both dominate in any industry. Like, I had I heard uh a pastor, and it was like a Mother's Day sermon or something, or around that
Oh
time,
Lord,
and
I
it was
hope you didn't
like
say anything. You
he said something about like, women are first he said women are fragile and should be treated that way. And I'm like, absolutely not.
mm-mm.
Hey, don't call us fragile. And then I think they realized what they had to
In
do.
front of the whole congregation? No.
And then they're
Uh-uh.
like, no, they're special. And I was like, you just told people that women are fragile. Like, and that is what they're gonna take. And I'm like,
Exactly.
and I think that's where for me, as someone who grew up very close within the church and understanding that, and very much, Latinos, especially like Mexicans, and there's the machismo, and there's this
Hmm.
whole like,
Yeah.
women are less than men and sort of like dominating. I think there's a lot of that has changed more with the younger generations and things like that. But I think there's still a lot of that thread still. Um,
Yeah.
around it, and again to hear a leader, right, someone who perceives this pastor to be a leader and to say things like, women are fragile and you gotta like, I was like, no, you don't go around saying that.
Because you know how detrimental that is? I
and,
don't know if they know that.
I was like, and again, like they caught themselves, they try to change from fragile to special, and I'm like, it's still the same thing. Like
We know what you meant.
I was
We
like,
said it now. So
Like it's out here, and again, it's these systems that we have. Like I as much as I hate to say this, like churches are systems, like they some operate very much like systems, right?
they
Like
do. It's a
they
business.
uphold some really terrible ideals and thoughts and sort of like things, and I mean, if you're in the United States, we're seeing it. We're seeing the role that the church and religion is playing in our politics. And it's the same sort of thread that weaves in the perception of what they can and can't do, what their roles are, and how they have to be submissive and all these things. So I think there's a lot. I mean, maybe there's still a lot to unpack.
There's still a lot. And you mentioned like within the younger generations, things are changing. I think, yes, I think with some of them,
Some
but
of them now.
I think these Gen Z men
Mm,
are, I don't know much about Alpha. I don't know much about the Alpha folk coming
oh,
up behind Gen Z, but that we, a lot of more Gen Z men voted more conservatively.
that is true.
And that's something I don't understand. I don't quite understand it because I feel like that's not what millennials do. Like a lot of the millennial men,
Yeah,
at least what I'm thinking of or what I can think of right now. But a lot of like college age 20 something year old men voted for that thing. And they can't really, and if again, I'm going based off what I've seen. You watch the videos of them, they can't really explain.
no, they can't.
And especially when when you like when you'll say, "Oh, well, he's a felon, right? And he's a convicted, sexual assault." Oh,
Mhm.
and I'm like, oh, okay. So
Are you getting an emergency alert?
I'm getting an emergency,
Okay.
something about dust.
Yes.
I didn't even read it. I'm just like, I'm trying to record a podcast, okay?
I got a
I'm
dust storm
interrupted.
warning.
A dust storm. I mean, the wind has been kicking here.
It is kicking.
It's kicking. I'm watching out my window. It is. I saw we both look. It's just like, when you get the amber alert
Yes.
and it pops up on your phone. Everybody gets it. I was
Yeah.
like, it must be quite serious for some
Yes.
dust.
Yeah.
Honey, we are in the Dust Bowl and we didn't even know.
I've never gotten a dust storm
I have
warning here in
never got, I
Chicago.
have my phone on Do Not Disturb. So it still came through my Do Not Disturb.
Well, it is meant to.
I guess so. That's the point. That's the point.
So
But I was,
we're gonna come back. We're gonna bring it back, people.
we'll bring it back. We'll bring it back. But no, I was just saying, it is very interesting to me
Yeah.
that we have heard a lot about younger men
Yeah.
voting more conservatively, which is it's again to me is so interesting because this going backwards, to me, that's what I
Yeah.
think. And thinking too about that pastor you just mentioned that said fragile. See, I would love, see, he could be on the panel. Like, why was fragile the word that came to your mind? Like we say, let's get to the root of it. Why is that the
Yeah.
word that came to mind? Fragile. And I'm not saying women can't be, but men can also be. And I just feel
Yeah.
again, there's there's this, we can do it, but you can't.
Yeah.
Like men, again, like, we've talking about men get angry and we do, especially black women. They say, oh, we're angry black women, angry black woman.
Yeah.
But men are angry most of the time. Do they,
Yes.
that's an emotion.
Yeah.
That's an emotion. But because white men particularly have been the one that have created how society and systems are set up,
Mm-hmm.
it's totally disregarded for them. And if you try to say
100%.
something about it, oh, honey, they get bent out of shape about it. And they'll say, well,
Mm-hmm.
you women do this. This is not what I'm here for. I'm not for this commentary for us to keep talking about each other. Okay. Let's get to what's going on. Why is that? So it just kind of all that popped into my head. And I don't know where we are with the time, but that's just where
I
we're.
think we'll have to start wrapping up, but I want to sort of add on to what you were talking about, especially the younger generation. Um, one thought that came to mind when you were talking was like how much fear has been sort of generated, right? Of like men losing power, men being threatened, and I think we see that very much so in, all these, laws that are coming against women and, our reproductive rights being, threatened and all of these, different ways that the current administration is trying to just kind of keep women down and things like because there's this perceived fear that, women are going to take over. The same way there's this fear of like, migrants and immigrants and the other. Like, I think women always put in that other category. And so now where there's this thing, I think there's this again perception
Hmm.
that from I think younger generations are like, oh no, like I'm not going to be able to have the same privileges that men before me had because now we got to be equal. Now we got to give, equity to women, or we have to like these things. And it's like, but nobody's taking anything away from
Taking
anybody. We're
anything.
just, leveling the playing field for everybody. Like that's the whole point of equity. Like we all have access to the same
Mhm.
opportunities, the same
That's the
positions,
point.
and whether we choose to pursue them or not, it's about having access to being a senator, to being a mayor, to being, an alderman if you have them in your area, to being president, to being vice president, to being a representative, like all these things, to being a CEO, a CFO, like, an engineer. Like it's about having access to them. Nobody's taking anything away from you. Like it's more like we're just adding space. Like we're just and
Everybody.
we've said this a lot of times in our podcast. There is space for everyone. There's money for everyone. There's space for
Yes.
everyone on the platform. Like there is just again this perceived notion that there's scarcity, like there's not enough for everyone. And it's like, no, but I mean, I think that's why we are where we are as a country, because there's this perceived idea of like there isn't enough for everyone. There isn't, enough space, enough money, enough like, but no, like there is. It's just we keep allowing the powers to be who continue to be in power and get richer and get more power and get more, and the rest of us just keep suffering and keep, and have, less. So no, so I think that's what when you were talking just kind of made me think of like, how much the whether it's the current administration, just the current times we're in, whether it's just as the United States or just as the world of like this fear, like there's just this continual fear of like there isn't enough. Like it's sort of like no, minorities have just taken too much. And they're like, what have we taken? Nothing. Like, and they're like, no, women are just getting too powerful. I'm like, from where?
Right.
Like we're not even like half of anything. And when we shared those stats last episode, like we weren't even half of anything. Like so it's like again, it's just this notion and this perception of like continue there's this continue to just build fear from of nothing. Like and then why are you fearing women? Like
Right. You think, yeah, and yeah, men, most of these men who think like this, you think you're better anyway.
yeah,
So
that's the
according to you, we're not even going to get to where you're at. So what are you so afraid of?
so like I think there's a lot around that. And I think as we start kind of wrapping up
Mhm.
and kind of thinking some final thoughts. So Martina, I'll give you some time to think some final thoughts if you like. But I think for
Yeah.
me, is I, is looking back over, the last two episodes and today's conversation, like it reminds me how much work we still have to do, how many more conversations still have to be had, how much action still needed to be taken, right? Like how do we bring these conversations to like the everyday? Like I think that's the important part. Like how do we have that, to your point of like how do we bring men into the conversation? How do we like have that, whether it's a panel discussion, whether it's a one-on-one, bringing them to the podcast, and doing that, but like what not just having the conversations, but the call to action, right? Like I would love to see more
Mhm.
men in spaces that we're not in as women, that we're not seeing, where they're calling out their colleagues, they're calling out people who are sort of like saying maybe things like, no, like why would we want to give her a shot? Like she can't do it. She's too emotional. Like call that out. Like, like if we're not there to call it out, and sometimes we are in the rooms and we're just too afraid to even say anything about it because we know that mostly everybody in the room is probably thinking the same thing.
Same thing. And even
you
if they are
know?
thinking differently, they're not going to speak up about it.
No. So I was like, so I think we, you know, a call to action is like, hey, like vote for women, right?
Mhm.
Like, you know, you know, donate to women uh causes, whether it's a politician, whether it's, organizations that are trying to get women into office, that are trying to get women into spaces that they haven't been. There's minority owned businesses and there's women owned businesses out here that we could be supporting and things like that. So that's sort of just some things that I see just as call to action and the next steps that we can take. And I think for you and I, Martine, is to figure out how can we bridge some of that conversation between men and women, and what can we do with the platform that we have. I think it's
Yeah.
important for us to also hold ourselves accountable in that space too. But I don't know, what are some of your final thoughts?
Well, you touched on fear. And I think that's, I don't know if we've talked much about that. I'm not going to get into it because, again, we'll be here another hour. But I think it is that fear that you touched. And, there's all sort of studies and things that are coming out now, articles talking about men and loneliness and how
Mm,
men uh,
mm,
are, because women are more independent and women are smarter or we're more educated, they're afraid, like, and I'm like, this fear, what are you afraid, this fear of? Because, I heard on a radio show um,
mm-hmm,
not too long ago, and this is a black radio show. So it was a black host that was talking, and he was basically saying, what are white men? I'm saying white men because that's what he was talking about. What are white men, what are they so afraid of? Like,
mm,
you own banking, you own education, you own healthcare, you own you still own the whole world. You
yeah,
still own the whole, you're still the majority. You own everything. Mhm.
yeah,
That's still to this day, no matter how advanced minorities have come, no matter how advanced women have come, they're still getting beat down every day, sometimes physically getting beat down for what you believe in or just standing up for what you believe in.
yeah,
So the fact that a lot of us have made it here who are the other is still saying a lot because every time we turn around, we get hit with something. So I think for us, the other, we have a right to not live in fear, but we have a right, like a right to be fearful because look what's
mm,
happened.
yeah,
But it just always makes me think, as a white man, what are you so afraid of? You own everything. And most likely you're going to keep owning everything. So, especially with what's happening now. So I was just, again, as you mentioned, I think us, doing our part, being accountable and, bringing these conversations and being active on this and trying to find ways to engage people to really, yeah, like, let's get to the root of this. I think this is,
yeah,
and a lot of people don't want to get to the root of it, obviously because it's working, and or people they don't want to think about it because obviously if you don't live that life, you probably don't really spend 2 cents thinking about it because you don't have to.
yeah.
But I think we're getting to a point, this country is hell in a handbasket. And who has that been done by? Who's making that happen?
Mm-hmm.
It ain't you and me.
No,
Ain't people that look like us,
no.
So am I closing us out? Are you closing? Who's closing us out today? Oh my gosh. Is it gonna be me? I don't mind. Mhm. Okay,
Yes,
it's gonna be me. She shook her head. Okay. Okay.
yes,
Well, that was my final thoughts. Um, and yeah, again, I know again we kind of, bounced around here and we touched on different things. And, this was a series focusing on politics and women in politics and why women are so hated. And I think what do we name the name of this series is
unselectable, I think.
Unselectable. Um, I think that was a really good title. Un Unselectable is a really good title because it is. Why are women unselectable? Like that's what we're trying to get to. And
Yeah,
as Lisette mentioned, we'll this will come back in
yep,
different iterations. Like we're going to talk about this from like a religious standpoint. Because religion is having a moment, right? Not like the good people, the other ones,
mm-hmm,
they
mm-hmm,
having their little moment. Um,
mm-hmm.
These are people, honey, they have bided their time. They are ready. Okay. So that's all I'm gonna say. And I'm gonna leave people with that. I hope people have a wonderful rest of your day, night, whatever you are, wherever you are, whatever time it is. And thank you again for listening to us in this series. And don't forget to like it, listen, and share. And we'll see y'all next time. Ta-ta.
Bye.